Welcome to the Meat and Potatoes podcast. We're here with Joe Vogel, who's the founder and owner of Timpanogos Hiking Company. I am wearing the shirt. I feel heavenly. How are you, Joe?
Doing good.
Thank you for bringing the shirt.
Thanks.
It's very soft. I feel like I can wear it for many, many years.
I hope so. Looks good on you.
Oh, thank you. We have a lot of fun, interesting stories because you've got a cool, interesting background, but we're going to focus at the beginning on the founding story of Timpanogos Hiking Company. Where did the idea come from?
So this was in part, I think, my brain trying to think of a way to come back to Utah. I had been away for about 15 years. All of my family is here in Utah. My brother used to be in D.C., my older brother, but he moved back a while back. And then during the pandemic, I had some kind of tough things happen with both of my parents. My mom had a serious brain injury. My dad nearly died of COVID. And so it just kind of, I think, shifted my perspective on where I wanted to be, and, just realizing that life is fragile and you only have so much time with people. So I was just kind of brainstorming. I had obviously a good situation out there. I was a tenured professor, but I started to think about, things that I could do. And so I started I started researching, when I had been coming back to Utah, hiking was something that was just really good for me, for my mental health. And, I'd take my son out or take both my kids out. And so it was just kind of putting those pieces together, like I wanted to come back to Utah. When I did come back, it was like, when you're away for a while, you realize like how beautiful it is here, like the mountains. And so I think I just put those pieces together and came up with a kind of concept, and then just kind of gradually just kept pushing in that direction until it started to come to life.
And you're teaching at Merrimack College, correct?
Yes.
And literature and film?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I don't have a business background, but I think, part of what benefited me kind of moving in that direction was storytelling, just the idea that in many ways, when you're thinking about branding, when you're thinking about a business and kind of making a name for yourself, it's about telling a story.
Yeah. And so you wanted to, you landed on a clothing option to kind of help tell that story and make money, right?
Yeah.
You're not doing it for free, I would assume.
No.
And no previous experience with textiles, with e-commerce, with clothing brands. Is that correct?
I mean, a little bit. I'd done some side hustles. I'd done some things on eBay, and I'd done some just messing around, really, just some things that were fun for me. And then I'd published books, which is entrepreneurial in a lot of ways, because you have to figure out how to market them, who your audience is, all these things. Work with a publicist. So I think that was helpful as well. I did have a kind of crash course with this like sunglasses business, which was a really kind of simple business model, and that helped me learn Shopify and also Facebook ads. So that was really helpful, just to kind of give me a little bit of a foundation in e-com, and then jumped into Timpanogos.
So when you're jumping in, you've got to, if I'm simplifying it, I've never done it, have the materials, the hoodies, the T-shirts with designs.
Yeah,
and all of that.
Yeah, well, so to kind of mitigate risk in the beginning, I was using print-on-demand services, so I could offer like a pretty good variety of designs, and then when somebody would order them, they were printed after the order, right? So I didn't have to like hold a bunch of inventory in my basement or something. Like I could just fulfill in that way. There were some drawbacks to that. Your margins aren't very good that way, but it does give you information pretty quickly. You can kind of find out, oh, this design's getting traction, or this shirt or this hoodie. So it was really valuable in the early stages to do it that way.
Yeah, and ultimately the designs are unique, right? Like you put some thought into it. It's just not, oh, here's a picture of the arch. Right. Talk a little bit about that.
So that was probably one of the funnest parts for me. I have some background in graphic design, so I used that background. I actually worked with the graphic designer on the official logo, but most of the other designs, like I've done. And it's, I think it was, for me, I just love anything creative, so, writing, something and then seeing it go out into the world was always like really fulfilling to me. And it was similar with the designs, you design something cool and like literally a week later, like people are buying it, and it's just like, wow, it's just kind of a fun process. And again, you kind of get a sense of like, as you go along, you get a little bit better, you kind of figure out what looks good, because I'd done graphic design, but not really for apparel before. So it was kind of a learning process, I guess.
And for you with the inspiration, do you doodle it on a napkin? Is it on an iPad? Do you just jump straight into the graphic design
I just
software?
go in, I use Canva and Photoshop, and I just mess around. Just, I've always loved fonts, so I just like mess around. I like retro kind of looking stuff, so those were the kind of directions. And then I would do research, just to see like, what other people were offering and like if I could do like a kind of a unique spin off of things that were already out there that I liked. So yeah, it's just, just messing around with like colors, messing around with fonts, with, graphic designs, all that.
And then if somebody says they don't like it, you don't have a design department that you can blame. It's like,
yeah, it's all me. It's on me.
You walk away and you're like, oh God.
Well, sometimes like there were times when I'd come up with what I thought was a really cool design. I'd put it up and like, a week would go by and nobody was buying it. And so you're like, okay, well.
Yeah. And you've got the various lines. Talk a little bit about that. The women's, children's, men's. Where did you start out though?
I mean, for me, I think we're actually still in the stage where I'm trying to keep it very simple. And so our bread and butter is still T-shirts and hoodies, and so really the T-shirts I felt like we got pretty quickly because I did research on like what T-shirts people reviewed the best and liked the best. And so we figured that out pretty quickly. The hoodies, like I went through multiple hoodies just to kind of figure out like what customers liked. But yeah, that's where we started, is with those things. And we have some things, we have some shirts specifically for women. We have some tri-blends. We have some tank tops. So we're starting to branch out a little bit, but we're still like, especially in our in-person store, it's still very much like T-shirts and hoodies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like if you go to a hockey playoff game or jazz basketball game, there's T-shirts on all the seats and they're all large and they feel like T-shirts that you'd get in 1988.
Right.
There's been a lot of improvements with the comfort and the flexibility. Ultimately, you have to decide on that too, right? Because that impacts margins, and
right.
People probably don't want off-the-shelf rough T-shirts. How do you decide on the actual blend of the fabric?
Well, that's where I try to do the research beforehand and just figure out. I mean, if you have something that has like thousands and thousands of reviews, and you see like, okay, people are consistently. I mean, you're never going to be perfect with apparel because there's always going to be people that say this doesn't fit right. I don't like this, But we were just trying to find something that wasn't like boxy, that was like soft, that fit well, but wasn't like too fitted, had some length, I mean, it really is just like, what would you want, right? And then also, you see how it works for women as well, right? And these shirts tend to do well for both men and women. Although, like I said, we do have some shirts that are specifically for women.
Yeah. And so it sounds like for the most part, you're just a one-man shop.
Now we have a team.
Yeah.
It's a small team. I had an intern through Handshake, and he turned out to be great, and so I hired him. And then we've got a couple other people that are helping out here and there. And it's a small team, but it's like, it's like those stories you hear about with startups. It's good energy. It's fun. Like, we're scrappy. We don't know what the hell we're doing half the time, but we're just kind of pushing, just keeping the momentum going, and so that makes it fun.
Yeah. And this is a great story, and we'll continue to tell it, but you are successful enough to be on the podcast, right? Which means there is that reward of watching the fruits of your labor result in revenue. What's that like to actually see, oh, it's we've got some revenue in here that we can use for the next thing we want to build.
I don't know. It's mixed because it's exciting that you're making money, and that people are liking what you're doing. But at the same time, like the first year or so of a business, like you're not getting any of that, right?
Yeah.
So it's just whatever is coming in, you're putting right back into the business. And so, especially having the physical store and doing the build out and inventory for that, that's kind of where we are. But at the same time, like I really can tell that we found something, right? Like it's clear that we found our audience, and that what we're doing is working. And so that part's really exciting.
I bet. And we're kind of at the tail end of May here. This will be published probably in about a month from now, but you keep talking about this store, right?
Yeah.
Give us some details on that, and where's it at, and where can people go and buy it?
So we, since we're Timpanogos Hiking Company, I wanted to be close to Mount Timpanogos. We kind of scouted different areas, and I was really, coming back from Massachusetts, when I went to downtown Provo, I was like, this is not the downtown Provo that I was used to when I was growing up here. It's changed a lot, and it's really walkable. Tons of independent businesses, restaurants. It's just a really vibrant place. So we found a place on University Avenue. If you just keep driving down University Avenue, you actually literally hit Timpanogos, right? You go into Provo Canyon, and so that, again, for me, coming back here after being away so long and just looking out the door of the store and seeing Mount Timpanogos up there, it's just pretty awesome. And then just like I said, the atmosphere in downtown and the support you get from the city, it was kind of a no-brainer, and it's a great location.
Very cool. And so the steps in being an entrepreneur, you're selling stuff, and you're seeing your data on Shopify, but now you got to go back to the old way of doing things where people walk in and have a chat and buy stuff and leave.
Yeah.
What's the plan for the retail store? Because it seems like you like the attention to detail. You care about the story. How involved were you in the build-up?
Very involved. And that was not easy either, but it, one of the epiphanies that I had as I was kind of creating this business and just transitioning to this phase in my life is I believe in an analog existence, right? Like we live in a digital world, and that's fine. I think there's, obviously we've used Shopify, we use Route, we use all these apps, to kind of help our business. But at the end of the day, I think the things that matter the most to us are physical things and physical experiences. And so that's what we're about. I wanted to have a physical store, and I wanted to kind of just promote this idea of going out in nature and going out in the mountains and canyons and having actual physical experiences, because we're just staring at our phones too much, And it's obvious. We all know that it's not good for us, obviously to some extent, sure, but I think that we could all benefit, from just being outdoors and having those types of experiences.
Absolutely. What has been the best product overall since the start?
So it's kind of interesting. Right now, we're still, I would say 90% of our business is still online, for one. Secondly, I would say about 70% is outside of Utah. And part of that is because we've kind of tried to do two things at once. We tried to create designs that appeal to just hikers more generally. So we have a shirt that says just take a hike. We have a shirt that has a mountain pulse. It has a pulse leading into the mountain. Those do really well. Those have really kind of done well nationally. But then parallel to that, we have also tried to, and this is going to be kind of an important part of how I see the business going forward, is wherever the store is located, I want it to have designs that are specific to the locations around it, right? Mm-hmm. So we have, obviously Mount Timpanogos designs, Rock Canyon, Bridalveil Falls, just stuff that's around that area. And as we expand, if we get more stores, I think that would be the plan, is to kind of try to do those two things.
Very cool. So in Tallahassee, Florida, there could be somebody wearing a Timpanogos Hiking Company shirt and they say What does that mean, right? Like, oh, it's a mountain in Utah.
Yeah, no,
Cool.
it's kind of funny that way. Like, and I always actually wonder because people will just order like the shirt you're wearing right now, and they will be in like Alabama or something, and I'm sure that a lot of those people maybe have some Utah connections, but it's just kind of an interesting thing that I mean, when you think of like Patagonia, for example, like it's just at some point it just people associate it with the brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. And it's great. You can take money from all over the place.
Right.
Doesn't matter if they've ever seen the mountain or not. Awesome. You've hinted at a few things. You teach literature and film, and that's what you got your PhD in, right?
Right.
And you've authored quite a few books and articles. The one I'm quite interested in is Stranger Things of the 80s.
Yeah.
And we'll deviate a second off of Timpanogos here. So I bet there's a lot of parallels between launching a clothing brand and writing a book. Love me some Stranger Things. Most of us in this office do. It's a big deal when the new seasons come out. And for whatever reason, I'm not a huge consumer of things on Netflix or Hulu. It's usually like documentaries, something like an 85-year-old would watch. But I've loved Stranger Things, and I think part of it was the 80s, right? The whole thing was amazing. But the 80s, I got to experience a little bit at the tail end, but I lived vicariously like teenage cousins and older folks. They like really had the 80s.
Right.
So for me, it was just like, this is so cool. Talk to us a little bit about where this idea came from and ultimately what's the book about?
Well, I think we're of the same generation, right? So, yeah, I was young in the 80s, but it felt like the 80s were just kind of transported in some ways, right? Because we all grew up on Spielberg movies and, Michael Jackson, Madonna. Like that was all just like part of the culture still. But yeah, I mean, I think the Duffer Brothers like just nailed it in terms of not just telling a great story, but like the attention to detail. Like they used the Stephen King font, right, that he used on his novels in the title sequence, and like they have that kind of grainy, flickering screen, so it feels like a VHS, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's just all these like references to like E.T. and Jaws, and all these things that Indiana Jones that we grew up on. And so for me, at that point, I'd done some more scholarly stuff, and I wanted to do something fun, and I was loving the show, and simultaneously my kids were loving the show, and so I was just like, I'm just going to do a book on this.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, I just kind of like picked different, things that I wanted to kind of emphasize that people I think would find kind of interesting, especially if you're familiar with all that stuff. So
yeah. And how many pages is it?
I think it's about 200.
And so that requires, like, obviously the thoughts in your brain, but some research.
Yeah.
And how do you write on a pad? Do you write on a Microsoft Word doc? How do you get the finished product? It's
mostly Google Docs, and I'll just take notes on my phone sometimes. But it's mostly, I've kind of got it down to an art form at this point where I just like open Google Docs that are like, like if I think like, okay, this is going to be just notes on movie references that Stranger Things makes or the soundtrack, and then I'll just put everything I, can think of, and then I'll start doing research and just dump it in there. And then when I actually start the writing process, I know I have all that stuff just ready to go, right? And, you have to still kind of research as you go along. But that simplifies it for me, And then I'm a big believer in just like leaving them open. So you create as little friction as possible to get back into it, and then just trying to stay in it for like a period of usually a book, to get a draft. I think you got to be in it for about 6 months. So.
And do you ever get writer's block?
No, I don't believe in that. I in the early stages, like I would hear about that and like I get it, but I think if you just kind of force, it's like working out, like training or anything that you do, like if you just are consistent with it, you're gonna have like shitty writing days where it just is clunky and it's not working. But like if you just say I'm putting the 3 to 4 hours in and whatever comes, then it's just it's the way it goes.
Very cool. So when you're finishing a book on Audible, at least they sometimes thank a cadre of people, and that's like the copywriter and the editor, and this person gave me inspiration. Who would you thank for Stranger Things in the '80s?
That for Stranger Things in the '80s, that
Who would you thank?
who would I thank?
Yeah.
Well, definitely my kids, because they were like, critiquing and like adding things here and there. But also, I had some colleagues that, I felt like a lot of people around me were like into the show, and so it was just like one of those projects where when people heard you were writing about it, they're like, "Oh, did you catch that, or did you catch this?" So it was probably a lot of people, but like I said, I think the Duffer Brothers who created the show, like they just like nailed it. I would love to see more shows like that, honestly.
Absolutely. And do you like share drafts with people you trust that are like halfway through, or do you wait until the end?
I like to get pretty, I like to get into it before I share drafts. Like I like it to be at least kind of polished. And then, then I'll have some people read some things and give some feedback.
Cool. And are your kids going to benefit in the royalties?
They've already benefited.
Oh, okay. That was their
They get an allowance,
Yeah. There you go. I love it. And you've had some experience with film and Spike Lee. Maybe a quick story about that?
Yeah, so that was one of the crazier experiences of my life. I mean, that was so one of my first books was on Michael Jackson. The impetus for that was, I think sometimes when we talk about Michael Jackson, it's always controversy, scandal, all this kind of stuff. And again, as a child of the '80s, I just was like, thought he was an amazing artist. And so I wanted a book that kind of focused on that. So I wrote that book, right, that was just completely focused on his artistry, on his music videos, his songs and stuff like that. Anyway, so that book got published by a big publisher. It was in Barnes & Noble. I get a call out of the blue one day from Spike Lee, and he wants me to come down to New York, to Brooklyn, and he teaches film at NYU. And so, I'm like freaking out. 'Cause I grew up watching those like Michael Jordan, Spike Lee commercials. And, so it was just, the whole experience was surreal. So there I am at NYU with Spike Lee having pizza and, talking to his film class about Michael Jackson's short films. And yeah, it was just a crazy experience.
How fun. What's it like to see a book that you wrote in a bookstore?
It's awesome. That never gets old.
Yeah.
I will say, once I write a book, I can't read it anymore. I'm just done with it. Like I never really like open it again. But it is cool to see it, make its way out into the world. And then, when you get emails from people that, in the case of that Michael Jackson book, he has fans all over the world. So you get emails from all over the place from people. So that's satisfying when you create something and it resonates with people and they like it.
I bet. You seem like a pretty confident fella. I've only known you for about 30 minutes now, but which is more nerve-wracking / hard, writing a book or launching a new startup clothing brand?
Well, right now I would say the business, just because so much of it is new, and ultimately you do have to like start to create a team. Like you can't just do it yourself, so you have to rely on other people. But there's just been a learning curve. I mean, there were certain skills that I brought to creating a business, but I still am like looking around, like thinking I need more people to help me, like to like scale this thing. Like I need people that have skills that I don't have. And with a book, you have an editor, but like pretty much you feel like you're in control of everything. With a business, like again, for this brand, I think to reach its potential, like I'm definitely going to need people to help me.
Yeah. And along those lines, have you thought of raising money? What have you thought from the financing side of things so far?
Yeah, I think my focus, like in the early stages, is just create the thing. And I think it will naturally start to draw people, and I'll probably start doing a little bit more networking. I've done some of that, but yeah, I think the thing for me was like get it kind of established, kind of some infrastructure, the designs, just like the brand, make it solid, like kind of get all of that in place, and then then the rest will follow.
Very cool. And are your kids helping with Timpanogos Hiking Company?
Oh yeah, my son and daughter have been repping the brand out in Massachusetts for like 6 months now. You know, like I swear that's all my son wears to school, and everybody's like, "What is that?" They never heard of Timpanogos, but you know, maybe someday they will.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've been great, and I'm excited because they actually haven't seen the physical store yet, but they're going to be out here in a few weeks, and they'll be able to see that and help with that as well.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's been less than fun, like launching a company halfway across America, but you've pulled it off to this point. And in the future, do you plan to relocate here?
Yeah. So this summer moving to Utah. It's been tough, but for me, like, you know, going to my son's basketball games, like I couldn't just stay here, but at the same time I couldn't be there. So I just tried my best to balance the two. But yeah, the plan is for everybody to move out here this summer.
Very cool. And if you have any advice that you can pass on to other folks that are interested in, you know, a clothing enterprise, what would that be?
I think, you know, try to start with something that has a clear niche or purpose, or just, you know, where you kind of have a clear sense of what you're doing, right? But then just, I don't know, I would say just go for it. You know, it's like everything's trial by fire. You're like anything that you are going to achieve in life, I feel like you just have to jump in, right? And sometimes you feel like an imposter, sometimes you feel overwhelmed, but like I've done enough things in my life now that I know that that's the way it works, and you just have to just, you know, keep pushing and keep learning and growing and ask for help when you don't know things, and so yeah, I think, you know, if you have an idea, just pursue it, learn as much as you can, and go for it.
Love it. Along those same lines, last question. There's a lot of people that have talked to me over the years of their bucket list, and that is to write a book. My guess is 99% wouldn't. What advice can you give to somebody that wants to write a book?
My advice is that it's not as daunting as you think. I think that it's scary to a lot of people, but it really, I'm not a fast writer, but if you write 2 pages a day for, you know, 3 months, you have a lot, right? Like It just starts to pile up. So the key is just consistency. And so I think if you know, I sometimes just like play these like psychological games on myself where it's just like, okay, you are going to do this for 30 days, because you can basically do anything for 30 days, right?
Yeah.
And then once you have done it for 30 days, like, oh, now I have 60 pages and you're in it, right? And you feel like, okay, now it's doable. It feels scary when it's just like one blank page, right? But once you're like 60 pages in, you're like, okay, I'm like a third of the way there. I could do this, you know, and it doesn't take that long to get there. And I think that's the thing that, you know, if people are thinking about doing it, it's like, just, you know, again, you just got to jump in and do it. And you learn as you go along.
Yeah. I lied. Last question, I promise. Is there a story that either hasn't been told or has been told that you would like to tell for the first time or retell?
Well, I already told you my Spike Lee story.
Yeah.
That's one of the better ones.
I guess like a story that you would write that you find interesting that hasn't been done yet.
Oh, well, I mean, part of the impetus for my first book was this Toni Morrison quote where she says, if there's a book that you want to read that doesn't exist, you should write it. For me, the one that I've always wanted to write that I haven't, because most of my books have been nonfiction, I'd love to write a novel. And I actually have written a novel, but it's still in draft stage. And that's one that like really took, you know, I mean, it's one thing to write like a nonfiction book where it's like, you know, there's still like a sense of like, you know, but when you do fiction, it's like, you're really just like, okay, I'm going to kind of go for it. And so it's not published. It's still a draft, but yeah, that's one that I would love to see published one day.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I wish we could keep going for a long time with this, but we'll end it here. Thank you so much, Joe. It's been great getting to know you, and congrats on Timpanogos Hiking Company. And thank you for the shirt. And we'll put the website there, and hopefully folks go and enjoy the store that you've built and the products that you have.
Awesome. Thanks, Garrett. I really appreciate you having me on.
You bet.